welcome back to Nurau Talks, where on Fridays we go through and interview experts in the field all over the world who talk about mental workplace. And so today we're very honored to have Lee Waller all the way from the UK joining us. Hi Lee, good to have you here.
Be here.
So Lee is a Professor of Occupational Psychology, Program Director and Leadership Faculty at Hult EF Corporate Education. She specializes in equipping leaders with insight, skills, and strategies to establish a sense of belonging for themselves and to foster an open culture of psychological safety, belonging, and inclusion in their teams. And these are concepts we talk a lot about at Nurau. How do we have more psychological safety or build more belonging in our teams? And so I actually came across Lee's work while I read one of her papers or a book at work and was super intrigued by all the work she does, and so invited her to come on the LinkedIn Live today. So we're really excited to hear all about the work you're doing, Lee, in belonging in teams.
Great speaking.
So belonging, is, and I feel like we all intuitively know what it means. I'd love to get it started with maybe your definition of belonging mean to you, and how do you define it in your research?
Okay, so having a sense of belonging is about feeling included, accepted, that we fit in, that we are part of something bigger and we're contributing something valuable to something. So it's essentially, it is what it feels like when you are included. And it's that feeling when you are able to be yourself in all your glorious diversity, and you feel comfortable in your own skin, and comfortable with the people that you are around. And when we feel it, it's a lovely, warm feeling.
Yeah, that's a great definition. I think being able to feel at home and comfortable in your skin, I think that's something we can all really resonate with. Belonging at work, I know we can often think about belonging in terms of friends and family, but why do you think it's important to feel like you belong at work?
In the workplace, when you think about it, the workplace is where we spend an enormous amount of our time. And yes, it's really important for us to feel that sense of belonging in our relationships and in our families and with our faiths. But as the workplace takes over more and more of our lives, and it's now kind of taken over from the feeling of belonging and the sense of belonging that we used to get from extended families and from more close-knit communities. And I think in particular with belonging at work, it's about having that sense of being able to add value. And that is one of the places where we really do add value. We are paid to do a job, and belonging comes from a number of things. So it comes from quality relationships, having relationships in the workplace where you feel understood, you feel empathized with, you feel comfortable, you feel trusted, you feel able again to be yourself. But in the workplace in particular, it also comes from this sense that you are adding value, you are able to contribute something important, you have a sense of purpose, you can add something meaningful. And that is particularly important, I think, in the workplace. But in the workplace is also, you need to be able to look around you in the workplace and also see people around you that have some shared characteristics, a sense of commonality, people that look like you, sound like you, have similar backgrounds, etc. So having that sense of belonging and all of those different things in the workplace is just as important outside of work as outside of work.
Right. And a follow-up question to that, do you feel like we are growing in awareness of belonging at work? Do you think this is a concept coming to awareness of this is really important now more than ever before? And how have you seen that evolve in the people that you work with?
I think it is really changing. So I studied this for my PhD, and like any good PhD student, I studied something that I'd had experience in. And when I was first looking at it, I thought, this wasn't necessarily going to be something that people were interested in. And then the more I talked about it, the more people said, oh, yes, I've had that experience. I've had that experience. And I realized it was becoming prevalent. But even whilst I was doing my studies, there wasn't an awful lot out there about how it feels when you don't belong, and particularly in the workplace. And as things continued, and when I finished my studies and I started teaching it, I thought, well, I might do the occasional session here and there. And then two big things happened. Firstly, COVID hit, and that had a big impact on people's sense of belonging, because it took away those quality relationships, that ability to connect at a human level, and people started paying more attention to it. We started to appreciate how important relationships are in the workplace. We started to appreciate more about the importance of well-being in the workplace. And then I think the second thing that changed was the reignition of the Black Lives Matter, and that extra focus that organizations were then placing on, hold on, do we have a good sense of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging in our organization? And so many different companies were then looking inward at themselves, and discovering, I think, a lot of the time that perhaps they didn't. And as belonging is how it feels when you feel included, because of those two things, I think it's become more and more important, and people are understanding how critical it is that people have a sense of belonging at work.
Right. What would you say, you mentioned not belonging at work as one of the things that were brought to awareness. What would you say are some of the impacts that you have seen of people not belonging at work?
It's strong. It's a strong negative impact. So firstly, psychologically, there is a big impact on our psychological well-being, primarily around how we feel about ourselves. So it has a big impact on our self-concept. So there's lots of studies, including mine, that has found that it's related to emotions such as, and emotional experiences such as depression and anxiety, etc. But what it seems to do is undermine our sense of self. So it undermines our sense of self-efficacy, that we are good at what we do, that we are competent, and it undermines our self-esteem a lot. The relationship between belonging and self-esteem is so strong that not only has it been demonstrated that it's there, but if you undermine somebody's sense of belonging, it will diminish their self-esteem. There's a causal relationship. And that seems to happen because we judge ourselves when we feel that we don't belong. We blame ourselves. We assume that there's something about us that means we don't belong, or there's something about us that means that we feel we don't belong. You know, there's something irrational about us that's causing this. We worry about what other people are thinking about us as well, and that's connected to our self-esteem. So it has a strong connection to our self-esteem, really diminishes that. But it also undermines our sense of a consistent sense of self. So it could be that outside of the workplace, we feel confident and we feel that we belong and we feel resilient, and yet we have this experience in the workplace, and so that can undermine how we feel about ourselves. So the strongest impact really in terms of psychologically is on our self-esteem. But then in terms of the way that we behave, and this has come a lot from my practice around this, is that it undermines a lot our engagement. So what we find, the way that people respond to feeling that they don't belong is one of two ways. If we are able to tell ourselves and understand for ourselves, we feel this way because of the situation. We feel this way because I'm new in the role, because I've just joined the organization, because I don't yet have the skills. Then we feel we've got a sense of control, and we will then try to do something about it. We will reach out and make connections. We will try to build relationships. We will try to find a way of adding value. However, for the large majority of people that have this experience, they don't feel there's any sense of control because they blame themselves and they attribute the experience to themselves. And so when that happens, we typically either try to fit in, so we'll behave in ways that are alien to us, and which makes us feel inauthentic, or we self-protect. And so we withdraw and we disengage and we keep quiet. And that has an enormous impact on our performance, on our engagement, on what organizations are able to get from us. And also it means that we quit. the third most common response to having a sense of not belonging is that we quit. And in this environment where we are desperately trying to attract talent and keep and retain talent, that has a really big impact. So there's two things really: the psychological impact in terms of our self-esteem, and then the impact that it has on our sense of engagement and performance.
That's fascinating. So it's self-esteem, but I think it also impacts metrics like turnover and productivity and things that I'm really concerned about, which I think is so important for us to be talking about this. People listening in, maybe managers at HR, are probably wondering then, well, what can I do as a leader to support my team, say to someone listening in who wants to better support their team and foster the sense of belonging?
I think the first thing is around awareness. So awareness of the things that contribute to belonging. So being aware of whether people have quality relationships, they've got connections in the team, whether they feel that they're able to add value. If you've got somebody in your team who's just had a significant failure, that could be undermining their self-esteem and their sense of adding value. So firstly, I think awareness of the people that might be at risk. If you've got the lone female working in an all-male team, or the lone woman of colour working in an all-white team, those people might be more at risk. So I think there's awareness there. There's also awareness in the way that it manifests. So if you're seeing people withdrawing, disengaging, being demotivated, being quiet, it could be an indication that there's something going on. And it gives you the step in to inquire. But then I think finding ways to support the development of quality relationships, making sure that people are encouraged to collaborate, to have opportunities to connect with people socially. And if you can help people develop better relationships, then that helps them to identify some commonalities, some things that they might have in common in terms of background or interests. And so they can start to create those connections. But then I think also there's something about helping people to understand for themselves what is the real value that they bring into work. We all, as human beings, bring something really valuable into the workplace, and helping teams to understand that and use that in the work will support their sense of value. And then I think the last thing is that we need to behave inclusively, particularly as leaders. We need to create environments of psychological safety where people feel comfortable to speak up. We need to invite people into our thinking. We need to be open and curious about the different things that people might be able to bring, and just behave inclusively and compassionately.
Love that. Lots of really good, helpful advice, and also touching a bit on diversity and being aware of how your team is diverse. You mentioned, gender and race being parts or factors that could possibly isolate people. So I think that's really helpful as an aware to be aware of the diversity of their team and how to be more inclusive. That's really, really good. I'm curious, when you talked about quality relationships, would you say that it's having a best friend kind of relationship, or would you say even water cooler conversations, or like how was your weekend kind of relationships is also would also be considered as a quality relationship?
I think quality relationships are those relationships where you feel empathy and understanding. I think that's kind of the critical thing. You feel that people understand you, you're able to be yourself, and people understand a bit about you beyond the workplace. So if the water cooler conversation is around, so what did you get up to? How was Chris when you saw him? How was that thing you were doing at the weekend? Just understanding people beyond the role that they do. Then that's a quality relationship. But it's beyond being able to say a quick hi and a quick catch up. It's about understanding people and having that empathy, I think.
Good. Great. So one last question before we end off, but now that you've talked about leaders, is there anything for us ourselves to do to ensure that we feel like we belong at work?
Yeah, I think there's firstly finding ways to create quality relationships, finding ways to reach out and connect to people, and try and identify those commonalities. Don't focus on the one thing that you might think makes you different, but try to understand where you might have connections with people. I think understanding how prevalent this is. I do polls with senior leaders, and I think I've talked about 3,000 now, and 87% have had this experience. So stop beating yourself up about it, I think. And I think that's a really important thing. Stop blaming yourself. Stop, try to attribute this experience to the environment and the situation rather than blaming who you are as a person, is really important. and recognizing and appreciating the value that you bring into the workplace as a unique human being. You don't have to be like everybody else. Just being you, who you are as a human being, is enormously beneficial to any organization.
That's so good. Well, thank you so much, Lee, ending with those words of encouragement for us to feel bold to bring our authentic self to work. I think is such a good note to end off on, and that it's a responsibility of both leaders and managers, but also ourselves to make sure we're cultivating a sense of belonging for ourselves and those around us. Thank you so much again, Lee, for joining us. It was such a pleasure to hear about your research and all that you do with belonging at work. There's Professor Lee's website if anyone's interested in following up more on her work. We posted it in the chat. And we're grateful to be sharing this knowledge with you, and we'll see you again for the next LinkedIn Live. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.